I was listening to a young dad trying to calm down one of his little kids who was freaking out. Dad kept saying, "Look at me, look at me," as if to say, if you look at me, you'll realize that there's someone in this world who loves you. If you look at me, you'll realize that you are safe here. You'll realize that there's nothing really to be afraid of. If you look at me, it will open up for you a new moment, and you'll be able to function again. You'll go to the soccer game or the party or whatever, because what you'll see in my eyes is just love for you. In one way or another, we all freak out. We each have real fears. Sometimes they're just a 1 when it comes to their intensity, the intensity of those fears, and sometimes they're a 10 and we're in full-out panic mode. I've been listening to some of the fears of our new freshmen that they have shared with us. The fear of missing out on what's going on back home. Worry that those friendships back home or that dating relationship won't survive this new life. Worried how we will be without our parents' love and attention so proximate to us as it was. Scared by the unfamiliar and the unpredictable. Scared about something happening to our grandparents while we're away. Worried, perhaps, about how our faith will hold up here in college, away from high school, or the parishes we loved. Fears of whether or not you will fit in, or how to be yourself in this strange new world of college. And it's not just freshmen. Ask any senior who's approaching graduation this coming May. So many decisions, so much to get together, so many jobs to be found, deciding on cities, deciding on vocations in their lives. They have a lot of them too. We all have them, right? I asked a mom just recently if she had any fears, and she said, no. And then I asked one more question. Well, what about ... And the fears just started pouring out. We all have fears. And if we scratch the surface of things just a bit, those fears will be there just below the surface. I don't have to scratch far to find out my fears. I know so many of them, and they're so available to me. And each one of those fears is very personal to us, and oftentimes very different for each of us. The truth is, we cannot live in fear because we cannot live in fear. We cannot live in fear because we cannot really live in fear. In that second reading you heard this evening from Hebrews, what's offered to us is a way through those fears. Here, in more places than just this, but for sure here, you can find a tender reassurance when the fears come up. From the letter to the Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, we have not approached that which could be a blazing fire, a gloomy darkness, or a storm, or a trumpet blast, or a voice speaking words such that those who heard it beg that they never hear that voice again. No. We have approached Jesus, mediator of a new covenant. The invitation to come closer to this human face of God and enter into this new moment. We are invited to draw near his face. We are invited to look at him. We learn by looking at him to be able to move past that which we fear by fixing our eyes on that human face of God. And in doing so, we discover that fear need not control our choices or our behaviors. And that the love we access through that face is stronger than fear. When I was a kid, growing up here in St. Louis, my family and I would make our annual outing to the St. Louis Zoo just down the street here. St. Louis Zoo, by the way, has just been named by Zagat as the #1 zoo in the United States of America. And by another survey, the 4th best on the planet. Free. And my brother and I would beg my mom and dad to go to the Big Cat Show. We loved the Big Cat Show. And I'd be so amazed as this little guy that the only thing standing between that trainer and instant death was this little chair he held up in front of him. And then a year ago, or so maybe now, I ran across a cartoon in the New Yorker in which a young lion tamer is holding this ferocious lion at bay with a tiny little chair. He's brandishing that chair in the air. And in this cartoon, the lion turns toward this other lion, asking, "Tell me again, what's so scary about a chair?" Good question, huh? Maybe a good question about almost all of our fears and our worries. What's so scary about a chair? Fears associated with blazing fires and darkness and storms, whatever that deep personal fear that threatens our life is, each of those fears hints at a question. And the question is this: given this fear, so real to me right now, who or what will be the source of my courage? And the answer, my friends, is right over there. That's the who or the what that can be the source of your courage. I'm telling you, as somebody who has had fears most of his life about one thing or another, somehow looking right there relativizes all those fears. Looking at him reminds me, at least, and perhaps all of us, to ask, really, in the scheme of things, does this really matter? Will I be okay if the worst thing happens? Oh, I know it could be awful and it could be really hard if this fear comes true, but could I survive that? Could I survive that feared loss and still love and still be loved and let that loving be enough? Could I still look up at the blue sky or some St. Louis sunset or my other real and true friends and have that be enough? Isn't it true for all of us without exception at any age that you and I have lived long enough now to know that what we have feared isn't really worth fearing? Or at least fearing as much as I did. After all, it might be just a chair. I'd ask you just to join me in a 1-minute meditation on these words of the Scripture. When we were little kids, it was moms and dads pleading with us when we were in meltdown, "Look at me, look at me." And tonight for us, it's Jesus standing in front of us. And if you can just see his face with your mind's eye, in just a moment of imagination that mediates the really real. Tonight, I ask you to imagine Jesus in front of you, saying those same words to us this time when the fears come. Look at me. Come close. Look at me.